Do you really want to know, Sharon?
Do you really want to know? I love it. Well, hello. Welcome to the Project Failure Files. I'm Sharon Weaver, founder and CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk, and welcome to yet another episode of our series where Sharon and I will explore what not to do as you manage your projects.
So this series is geared towards anyone and everyone who has ever had or acted as a project manager title, or if you're responsible for leading or overseeing some sort of project. Simply put, if you've ever managed a project, this show's for you.
In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about some of the common pitfalls in project management, sharing some personal stories and experiences, because that's all we know is our personal pains, and some of the strategies and best practices. I always have to use the air quotes there, to help you to be successful. And I love approaching problems from this standpoint. It's different. It's about the pitfalls. It's what not to do, rather than the here's all the fantastic things that you go and do. Is this overly optimistic, positive structure? No, let's talk about what will go wrong, because if it can go wrong, it will go wrong.
So for this episode, we've picked a doozy. We're going to be talking about the problem of avoiding overreach, the perils of boiling the ocean. In other words, the problem of excessive decision makers, and maybe even bigger than that.
Yeah, in a past episode, we talked about excessive decision makers specifically. This is the next part of that. It's almost the second half. It's a two-parter. Yeah, so over the next 30-minute episode, or the next few episodes, we're going to continue to refine this. I think this is going to be ongoing, adjust how we structure this. But basically, the way that we outline each of these each week is that we give an outline of the topic first and foremost, talk about it, dissect it, and then do some basic analysis and storytelling around it.
Yeah. Second, we're going to share real life stories, real relevant case studies that we've come across in our journeys in our careers, and maybe help you understand the full scope of the issue.
We're also going to talk about practical solutions, because I think that's the key here. It's one thing to talk about the pain, and we all recognize them. It's another thing to say, well, what actually worked? How did you overcome that? How are you currently overcoming that? Now that we're going to be very careful. We're not talking about current projects and clients, so don't worry about that.
And don't forget, we always have to address the cultural issues, because to make any kind of lasting change, you always have to understand how each issue is going to impact your team and your organizational dynamics.
Culture wins every time. So if you have the culture, you're going to be successful. So it's a big part of any of this. And then, of course, preventive measures. How do you avoid having the problem? This is the benefit of the hindsight on past projects for us. I know that's a lot to cover in 30 to 40 minutes, but that's the basic pattern for each episode. And we'll tweak things here and there as we move forward, as we're still trying to get into this rhythm. But I think we've got this model down.
So let's kick things off this week and talk about avoiding overreach, the perils of boiling the ocean. That sounds like a movie in the making, the perils of boiling the ocean. And don't forget, feel free to comment, share your experiences, ask us questions, just throw it in the comments and we'll respond as we can.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, how do you define this, avoiding overreach?
Oh, geez. I mean, I think, when we think about the idea of going in to do a project, oftentimes people, first of all, have no idea what it is what is the problem, what are they trying to solve, and what's the scope of what they're trying to do. And I think in a good, mature organization with a great PMO, hopefully this has been done and we know what it is we're doing. But I think more often than not, like a lot of times, people know they have a problem, but they have no idea like how to define it or what they're even really trying to solve for, and definitely not sharing that, kind of scoped knowledge with the team.
Well, I think of it too, if you put it in individual terms, and I think this is one of those topics that I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned, like during the pandemic, of people feeling overwhelmed. They're finally voicing the fact that they were feeling overwhelmed with the volume of things that are out there. But I've had so many projects that I've worked on, companies I've worked for or with, where I was like, I get it. Like you're very ambitious. You want to do all of these things. There's a lot of change that needs to happen. But when there's too much, I mean, going back to like an individual basis, if I have too much on my plate, like I'm a list guy. I mean, everywhere that I look, I have, sticky notes with lists. I use to do, I use all these tools. I put them in project plans. I've got kind of a process for writing down the notes and then migrating those into tools and apps on my system and then into projects that I'm working with. A big part of that, though, is taking that big, complex, confusing thing, that overly ambitious goal, and breaking that down into pieces and understanding, okay, what's actually achievable. Because what you often find is that there's a lot of pieces in there which are actually not relevant with driving towards that outcome.
Yeah.
And so there are the nice to have things, and there are the need to have aspects of that project. And so if you can't break it down into those components, could then be multiple projects. How are you then going to assign out those tasks and drive towards any semblance of an end goal, a date, a budget?
So if you want to talk about what not to do, I mean, as we're talking about this as a problem, don't have requirements. That if you go into a project and just don't have requirements, just be like, we're just going to do this thing, that you're kind of, bound to fail, because at that point your scope creep is going to be ridiculous, because you're just going to try to solve all the problems along the way. And I have had the fortune to really work in some really top agile companies, but where agile can go wrong as a methodology is the idea of thinking that you still don't need to know what you're doing. You don't have to have clear requirements. And it doesn't matter what methodology you're in. If you don't understand what one thing it is that you're focused on, then you're just going to try to do all the things, to your point, and you're not going to have any idea. And what's going to end up happening is you're going to get distracted and you're going to get off track, and different people are going to have different opinions about what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think, if we go with the premise at the very, very beginning of having good requirements, and that requirements have value, and that, whoever's doing that part has value, then I think by the time you get to the project manager, the project management part of this should be, we understand what we're trying to do. Now let's get it done.
What's funny too is that you hear a lot, and I mean, we're going to future episodes, we'll talk specifically around scope creep and other things around scoping a project in general and the mistakes made there. But one of the, I think, misnomers is that you can know all of your requirements up front. It's funny that, generally speaking, we build our plans, we through our lens of understanding of the problem space. So up front is one of the reasons why agile took off, and just a much more flexible, where you have fewer things you're trying to deliver in a shorter time frame, and so you're able to make decisions, move quickly, learn about those things, and incorporate that in. But to your point is that agile model doesn't work if you don't know what ultimately you're trying to go and deliver at the end of that.
Yes.
I used to always refer to this, and I would present on this on change management, and I would refer to that very important American film, the classic film, where of Spaceballs, of course, is what I'm talking about. Where very important, yes, in cinematic history. But there's one point where the bad guys, where Dark Helmet Man and his ship, they overshoot the good guys in hyperspeed, and they can't turn it off. They go plaid. And so I would call it going plaid, yes, where a project went plaid. But the basic concept here is that, like with hyperspace, if you're not exact in your measurements at the beginning, you're slightly off. As you move forward, of course, you'll be hyperspace, you'll be in a different galaxy than the origination. So, the going plaid is pushing hardcore at those initial requirements and that's the problem with the old waterfalls. By the time you delivered it 2 years later, you were nowhere close to what the business actually needed. You need to make adjustments as you learn to keep yourself on course with that target. And that's where agile falls in place. So just know that you're not going to know and understand everything. That's kind of what management is. Project management, certainly, but management at large is the ability to make decisions based on limited information. And you have your experience, you have all the data and stuff around there, but you make the best decision possible with the limited data that you have, and then be ready to adjust as needed.
And this goes back to that whole "what problem are you trying to solve" concept is that if you as a project manager are not in sync with whoever the BA or whoever's doing the requirements on the project is, if instead you're like, well, I'm only doing my thing, because there is, boiling the ocean is this idea of doing too many things and not focusing on what you're doing. But to your point, going plaid is that idea of being so focused that you don't understand where it is you're actually headed. You're just so focused on where you're headed that you forget about the rest of the team. There is this middle ground of what problem are we trying to solve, and are we working together to do that? And so that if something does shift along the way, and in this day of modern technology and everything in the cloud, if you waited 2 years to look and see if you were synced up, you would be so far off base. Your product might not even exist anymore. Let's be honest. Yeah. But I mean, if you think about the idea of during that project, it's the idea of kind of hand in hand working with your team to make sure that you're keeping your eye on the end goal, but that you're also being open to flexibility and change during the process. But what problem are you solving? Because did that problem stay the same? Is it still a problem? Are we solving the problem in the right way? Are we all in agreement on how that's going to happen? Some of that needs to be flexible too.
I've had project leaders, senior leaders in the orgs that have a couple times where they've been really good about going in every time we have a meeting to restate, like, what is our mission statement on this project, or what are we trying to achieve? It's one of the reasons why you have massive companies like Microsoft where they have their mission statement out there. Any large company, I've worked with several that were really strong at driving OKRs. For example, down the organization. What do I mean by this? So the objective and key results for those that aren't familiar. But that idea that on an annual basis, the company is trying to do these 3 things this year. And so I have worked with some organizations that were really good at that. Then with my business unit, we knew for those 3 things, we were really delivering on, we were focused on 2 of those 3 things. And here's how our projects fit into those. Or we recognize, hey, we've got these projects that are operational projects. And a lot of my career have worked in shared services teams, like internal consulting teams of PMs and engineers that I've managed, and operations teams, support teams and things, where a big part of our work didn't apply to those new initiatives that the product teams and marketing and sales were working on. We were keeping everything running. But when a company does those 3 things right, one of them is more operationally focused, is about building excellence anyway. But anyway, we understood, okay, everything that we're doing on a quarterly, a monthly, a weekly basis, how those activities were driving towards meeting those and achieving those 3 goals. I wish I came across more organizations where that organized around those initiatives, because one of the problems with having that boiling the ocean approach is that nobody then has passion, well, maybe around their pet projects, but what am I focused on? Am I really making a difference? I'm doing too much. How do I really show that I can meet or exceed my personal, metrics around these things? Because it's a hot mess all the time.
Yeah, no, I have people. So, and we talk about this frequently in the idea that consultants are brought in at the mess stage, right? They're always brought in at this, I have a problem, I need help, how can you help me? And I would say, on a pretty consistent basis, people come to me and say, well, I have this problem and I want this project, and I'm trying to figure out how to get my leadership to support this project, or to, be able to fund a consultant to come in and help us. And oftentimes my advice to them is to go back and look at what are the initiatives for your business for this upcoming year, and how can you tie what your need is to that initiative, because that's really what the company is focused on. So if you have a problem right now, let's say you have a problem, you want new software, or you need more headcount, or your security isn't tight enough, or you want some change. Look at your business initiatives, and see, how does that tie into your problem? How can one of those business initiatives really impact or help you change the problem that you're trying to solve? Because oftentimes they go hand in hand, because you're systemically, this whole boil the ocean thing, right? You're systemically feeling things that at an enterprise level probably are something that they recognize, but they don't know how that enterprise initiative specifically helps you in a department or in a business area, one-on-one. And so if you can tie those together, then what's happening is, instead of everybody trying to do all the things at once, we can now say, no, this ties back to this change up at the top now is going to impact this, 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 this. And now we know what we're doing, and we're not trying to do everything.
Right. Another part of this, of the overreach idea too, is that aspects that you may be trying to incorporate into your grand scope of the project, which have ownership in other areas, so that your department, your team, your division should not be doing. And you may be doing it because an executive said, no, included it in there because it's not getting done. So that's, I think, a big part of this is letting the alerting the responsible party, the true stakeholder of those tasks, and helping guide them, like where their piece fits in the overall plan and scope, but not trying to step on other teams. I mean, I've had this experience again and again and again, where somebody who is very headstrong in another department would go and say, hey, we're going to go do this. Well, it's not being done, or it's not being done right, and so we're just going to go and do it, instead of like, no, you need to hold people accountable for what they should do. And that's part of that discussion. That's part of what having a project portfolio review, having a governance body that's looking at that, projects overall, and somebody who can recognize that, okay, no, this other group really owns this task, therefore it should not be part of the scope of this project. It doesn't, it's important, but ownership is over here. That then, I'm not a huge fan of the phrase of giving people plenty of rope, but the idea of, let those teams that should be accountable, that own those, give them enough rope to, to hang themselves if they don't, do the pieces that they own, that they should be responsible for. I hate managing projects that way. I'm very much like you. I want to go get it done. If somebody's not doing that, especially in operations, especially when customers and external clients are part of that that negotiation, is they have visibility into the project, whether it's moving forward or not. I want to make sure that it's done so that we look good and we don't lose a customer. But then you're doing somebody else's job. So
well, that comes into the cultural conversation. That comes into the cultural conversation. Right. It's like it leads we have this conversation. It's so funny because we walk right into it, and it always comes back to that cultural organizational piece of, you can tell a mature organization at a project management level because they know what projects they're working on. They know who their leadership is. The larger organizations that I work with have matured into portfolio management, where there's somebody that's kind of got that oversight over many projects. And then there's enterprise architecture, where somebody at the very top is looking at, what are we doing? And do they all go hand in hand? Are they stepping on each other's toes? Or is everything kind of working together towards a greater good?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, culturally, if you have a culture where transparency, giving visibility, Of course, there's a lot of other important aspects to that, making sure you have proper reporting for that. I mean, I've had a number of times where we're providing reporting, where we built dashboards for the portfolio view. We're trying to do adequate resource management, so we know when people are being overburdened with projects. I mean, when you start getting into that scenario, I mean, one of the frustrating things is that you have, and you need to have conversations with your engineers, with your analysts, with your project managers, so that they're not hiding the fact that they're being overburdened with that. They need to be very clear about what is the actual time it's taking you around these things and those estimates. You're continually adjusting what that looks like, so that we have an idea of, can I give Sharon this other project or have her come pick up the slack here now that she's rolled off? It's like, and somebody else would be like, no, or Sharon, you saying, no, here's what's actually going on. I'm already working 60 hours a week. I've got family stuff going on. I've got a vacation that I can't move that's coming up. Having those kinds of real life, conversations around the project and building that in are essential to this, making sure that you are not taking on too much. I had it in one of my first managers, my first tech job, little company outside of Sacramento, California. Had a great conversation with the CEO, who was very much watchful, mindful of the balance between work and personal life and stuff. And I had, my daughter, who is about to have her third child now. So it was a long time ago. But the baby was my, 1-year-old at home. And I remember I was working on a Friday and it was like 6:30 PM. Everybody else had left, all the techs in the back, and the office kind of emptied out. And the CEO is just like, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'll be here for another couple hours, need to get this done. And he's like, no, you need to turn that off and get that done. And he says, I said, yeah, but we told them we'd have it done on Monday. He says, well, if you can't get it done, come back in the office on Monday. It means that either we were off on our estimate of the time, or you need help. We need more people here. The answer is not for you to overwork yourself and get burned out. Like, that's the wrong answer. We can't expect our people to do that. That's a fine exception. I've worked plenty of overnighters, or worked over the weekend, or when I've gone live in a new system, or had to travel to do training to this specific team around that, to kind of bolster the learning and the adoption, that side of it. Again, those should all be exceptions to the rule, not the way that we work day in, day out.
Yeah, I think at a cultural level, when we talk about what not to do, to your point, not being transparent is a big deal, because if you feel like you have to hide things, or if you feel like, you have to be responsible for everything, at the end of the day, if you're one of those employees and you feel like, well, I have to fix this and I have to fix this. And a lot of people, I'll speak on change, or I'll speak on leadership, or I'll speak on, good team dynamics. And I'll get people in the audience that are like, but what happens if, when I say I need to do something, I don't get that response? I get a response of, suck it up and do more work, or you need to work more hours. And I was like, well, you've got two choices. One choice is to say, well, how can I, make individual contributions to make this culture better, and, work with my teammates to make this better. And if it's better, that's great. But if at a cultural level, you feel like you're responsible for changing the entire culture, you might have to rethink whether that's the right role or the right place for you to be. Because, when we talk about boiling the ocean, you just can't. You can only be responsible at a healthy level for the part that you're responsible for. That's it. That's all you can do. And I think when we're talking about what to do right, the more open and transparent, the more we can trust each other as a team, the more we can trust our leadership, the more we can say, this is my job. I did my job. I'm proud of my job, but I don't have to be responsible for your job. In psychology, they call it interdependence. It means that we are not codependent on each other. And I'm also not only independent, but we are interdependent on each other independently. Everybody's more successful at a cultural level if we all are doing our pieces, and those pieces are all coming together to work successfully.
Yeah. So I was just thinking too of a preventive, measure for this is, to and we say this a lot, you and I, but to be clinical in your approach. You need to go in and defend your the definitions in the space, and need to have a clear understanding. If you don't have a clear understanding of what it is that you're supposed to go and do, what the scope is of the effort that you've taken on, then I assure you, people around you don't understand the scope. They're likely confused by, and people hide within that chaos of too much going on. That is a great way. I mean, think about that. If I know exactly what the output is, the goal, the time, all the pieces, and I then say, yes, I will take that on. I go build the plan around that. I understand where those dependencies are. I could then go and have very frank conversations about people not doing their piece. And you can point right to them. It's like, we're on date. This team was supposed to deliver this piece. They're delayed a week. We're delayed a week because of their piece. What do you want me to do? Like, I don't own that. You're their manager. You're their, like, I'm not the boss of them. Here's what I can go and do. And it's, I don't want to phrase it this way to say that it's like, it's about moving your judgment off of you, attention off of you around that. But can you defend your plan? If you can't defend your plan, that's where you start. A preventative measure is to ensure that you can always defend your plan.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. It's funny. Like, if you've ever worked for me, everybody's like, "What's the secret to success?" And I'm like, plan, 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 plan. You need to know what is it you're doing and when are you doing it, who's responsible for things. But the second piece of that, at a cultural maturity level, is hold people accountable to what they said they do. And you can always change that. You can always come back to me and say, look, I'm really sorry. I estimated this originally and I thought this was going to take this much time. But now that I've gotten into it and it's all open and I'm looking at it, I think it's going to take longer. But the sooner you can trust your team and the sooner you can come to your team and say, hey, this is going to change, the sooner the project manager can know, I need to make an allowance for this. I need to change the plan. I need to do the contingency. I need to update the communications. I need to deal with the things around this so that everybody's on the same, wavelength.
Right.
So everybody has to trust each other to the point that they can be open and transparent and vulnerable about what is going on and what's happening. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say you can just do whatever you want and you can be late and all of that. It's the idea of being open and honest with your teammates.
Right. I love the phrase, according to the plan of record. The plan of record. That recognizes that, look, we're going to make adjustments. So we have our change management model. That's why what's funny is we're talking about this. How do you avoid this issue? And it kind of goes back to, like a project management organization 101, going and building that structure. And what I've always said is, I don't care what your methodology is, but have a methodology.
Yes.
When I would send my PMs and pay for training to go get their PMI certification, PMP certification through PMI, and I would say, like, that's fantastic. However, when you come back, I don't want you to ever attempt to use 100% of what you've learned. Like, you need to adjust for that. But now you have all these tools in your tool belt about how to go and approach this. But making sure that you have a high level methodology, that approach for projects, helps solve for so much of this, of identifying that scope, of breaking things out into multiple projects or a project into multiple phases, so that you're not boiling the ocean. You're saying, like, let's unachievable in this scope. We need to first go and do this step, which will then allow us to do this step, which allows the next steps after that. And here's what I've signed on to and what I'll agree to. And you need to, again, I'll say, be strong, push back on being assigned to ambiguity and chaos. As I say, ambiguous project plans. Say no. Just say no.
Well, and this is where Agile can be really successful. This is one of the areas where I think a lot of people are like, they have issues with different methodologies, but I think Agile can be really successful at this particular level because each piece that is to be delivered is so well defined and so well assigned that the accountability gets a lot better, because you can say, I just need you to do this one thing, and I'm going to scope it within a reasonable time frame, and it's going to be very well thought out. And if anything needs to change, it's okay because it's small enough that that impact is not going to throw off a 3-year project plan. It's simply going to nudge things a little bit. So the smaller and more granular you can break down those deliverables and those tasks, the more you have that flexibility and we're just needing flexibility more and more and more and more as we get into modern architecture. But the smaller and the more granular and the more specific you can be around each of those deliverables, the more flexibility you have within whatever methodology it is that you're doing.
I do that personally for any hard task. I break it down into its fundamental, the end node activities.
Mm-hmm.
And it just feeds in with my OCD is that lists. I'm a list guy. And so breaking it down in, so I know every day I have my lists. It's why I have on the screen, I've got to do, I've got the sticky notes and things around there, and I have the process there so that I know I'm making progress around that longer term goal. You won't see the progress. It's easy to get discouraged. It's easy to get confused around where are we in this process to achieving that end goal if you've not broken it down into its base parts.
Yeah. And I think that's really important to mention in this particular episode too, is that sometimes you feel like you're boiling the ocean if all you're paying attention to is tasks. And so one of the real important jobs of the project manager is to help people see the overall picture on a regular basis. So if you can, on a regular basis, whenever you're meeting with your team, make sure that they remember, I know you're working on this little task, but here's the larger picture that we're all going to achieve together.
That mission statement again, like for the company, for the project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
So
sorry to
keep people on
interrupt.
the same page. No, you're fine.
Yeah. No, I think we're on the same page on that. Yeah. People need to know what they're working towards and need to be reminded of that. So, because sometimes this is where that phrase is, sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. If you're down in the woods, you're lost. But as soon as you get a perspective out, it's like, oh, we're right there, redirect. And we're much closer than we thought.
Yeah, it's funny. I had this little page, this little tear-off book. It was like one of the Covey little tear-off calendars. And one of the ones I remember is a leader's job is to stand at the top of the tallest tree and yell, "Wrong jungle."
I like that. And that's a good place to close out to. So that's it for this week's episode. Please be sure to follow us out on socials, of course, Buckley Planet. And I guess we should have our Twitter handles and our profiles here, but follow us. All the episodes, all the recordings are available through YouTube. You can follow that on youtube.com/Buckley Planet. You'll be able to find it. All the episodes. And of course, Sharon, you need to add that stuff to your page as well. I'm just saying.
I do.
But thanks for watching. We're back. We're here every Monday. So find us at the same time at 9 a.m. Pacific every Monday. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
See you next time.